When I first started looking at robotic process automation, someone asked me to research it a little bit. I thought I was going to be talking about robot controllers and automating robots. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. So what is robotic process automation, also known as RPAs? Well, it's not a method to control and manage robots. It's not process automation for factory machines or a way of replacing workers at all. What it actually is a way of automating information workers of redundant tasks. It really had its birth out of UI testing automation. So normally with UI testing automation, you record a screen, it captures mouse clicks in different locations of the screen, or if you're using a web browser, it captures tags that have been changed and button presses and things like that. Well, they've taken that UI testing frameworks that have been around for quite some time, over 10 or 15 years, and they have repurposed that to help with information workers, and it records how users interact with applications, multiple applications, and then it allows you to play those back with the ability to inject parameters or variables into your recordings. This is really cool because this now lets me automate things that I have to do over and over again in a very simple way by recording the way that I do it. So it's a great way to decrease the number of errors and of highly repetitive tasks that are user interface intensive. So about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a huge influx of money. In fact, over the last 3 years, huge influx of money into companies in this space. The top three getters in this space as far as financing goes was UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Blue Prism. Each one of these companies garnered quite a bit of money. The most funding went to UiPath with over $1 billion in funding, and then Automation Anywhere with $500 million, and then Blue Prism with $50 million. This is a lot of money. And this money didn't come from your typical VCs sitting in Silicon Valley. We saw most of this money coming from financial institutions in New York and LA, which is very different. I researched it a little bit more and found out that the reason these companies are investing in it is because they use the technology. They want to make sure the technology grows and is used in other industries as well, because they're looking at ways that they can automate information workers' redundant tasks so those information workers can focus on things that are of higher value. So they've seen huge benefits in this. There's some great ROI calculators out there on each one of these guys' sites, and they're right now trying to differentiate themselves. But before we talk about how they're differentiating themselves or how we manage these robotic process automation tools, RPAs for short, let's talk about the two modes of operation. Today, every single one of them do attended execution of RPA bots. In fact, they short for robots, right? So these RPA bots in attended mode means that they handle tasks for individual employees, that an employee works with the bot as they're working through things. So there's pause statements. The employee may type something in and then hit continue, and then it'll continue on through the workflows, right? Employees trigger the bots themselves, or sometimes through some automated tasks that might be built into their normal workflow. They've found major improvements in productivity and customer satisfaction in call centers and other service desk types environments. And that's attended, right? The unattended aspect is really great for automating back office and processes at scale. So now it's not tied to an individual employee, but now I've got to do massive amounts of work that were done previously by people. Maybe I can automate that and get that work done faster. This is a really good way of working with, I shouldn't say good way, but it is a way of integrating legacy applications and new modern applications. It's kind of quick and dirty. There are some downsides to it, which we'll talk about later, but it does free up employees from rote work that they would normally be doing, and lowering costs, primarily improving compliance and accelerating process improvement. So There's a lot of benefits to both. Attended, available everywhere today. Unattended, it's a little more hit and miss on all these tools. They'll all say they have unattended, but there's some tips and tricks in using them effectively. So let's talk about working in the enterprise and why this is an interesting space specifically for the information worker. And this mostly comes from the information worker themselves, where they have repeatable manual processes that they're trying to run. And it's primarily been focused on them. But to really work it in an enterprise well, you have to consider the other actors involved, like IT. IT's main goal is optimization, protection, and reliability. And then you've got your new application developers on the right-hand side here, and they are developing products and quick iterations, and they are the Wild West, right? They want to move fast and get things done. There's some issues with working with RPAs in these environments. Some of the issues are, as developers are developing new products, or maybe even changes or updates to existing products, they could actually affect RPA bots dramatically, right? Because they're pushing out new things, changes into legacy applications sometimes, and sometimes into new applications that are running in private clouds or public clouds. And IT organizations are trying to maintain, reliability, protection of IP, optimizing for cost. All those things are in play. And this poor information worker, he can adapt pretty well to changes that are happening from your new development of products or the way workflows go, and IT pushing back saying, hey, we need to slow things down. They need to be more secure, reliable, and at a lower cost. So this coordination, this dance between these three actors in your system actually are an important thing to understand when you're dealing with RPA bots, because your RPA bots tend to be a little bit more static and fragile to changes in your system. So best way to explain this is take a look at your information worker. He's working on applications, and maybe he's recorded an RPA bot, right? So he's recorded this work, it's happening. He may need some help from IT to get the right version of the software or whatever it is. But IT, he's setting it up. He's managing legacy applications and also private cloud in this respect. Then you've got your developer over here. I'm going to release new software, right, in the private cloud and public cloud. And then I'm going to train the information worker on how to use my application. All right, and then that application is going to now be tied into the information worker's normal workflow. It could be a new app that he needs to work in the process that he normally does with a legacy application. And in that case, he needs some way of getting access to that that's in the public cloud or the private cloud. And so IT has to establish that, credentials, all those sorts of things. So the information worker will record a new bot and get that running. And that works out pretty well. But now let's say I make an update to the application. I've got this update to an application. A dev is telling the information worker, hey, I gave you this new app update. The information worker is all pissed off because he has to now re-record his bot because maybe they added a new field in the application. Maybe they removed a field. Maybe they moved things around. Developers need to understand those sorts of things. You've got to understand what all is happening there. Because the bot is tied to typically screen space or tags in a website, you have to be very mindful when you're an app developer that when you're making updates that you don't break all the bots. And that may include some testing of a handful of bots in your normal development cycle that you're working. So one thing we have to look at is what is the computational complexity now as the number of applications I'm tying together increase with an RPA bot, as well as the number of environments, because each environment has a different set of credentials I need to worry about, different reliability numbers and latency. All these things come into play. So when you are working with an RPA tool and you're trying to use it to tie legacy and new applications together, limit the number of applications that you're working on and the number of steps as well. You've got to be mindful of this, because if you don't, what you'll find is your complexity goes up dramatically to a factor of, like n factorial type of number. And it could be even worse than that because of the number of steps involved. It becomes a nightmare to manage because you've got to be able to test those new workflows as well. So be mindful of that. Change in this environment is very hard to work with. So there's no common way to automate processes and workflows across this whole thing in a secure manner because of the different environments that I'm working in as well, unless you have tools like single sign-on across multiple clouds, including legacy applications. Most of these applications have some kind of a login, whether it's a username and password or authentication credentials, whatever it may be. You've got to come up with how you're going to manage that. Most of the RPA tools allow you to inject security credentials into the bot at runtime. If they do not, I would steer clear of those tools because that means you don't have reuse. And it also means anytime that you have to change passwords or reestablish keys, which happens in a lot of organizations, like every 3 months you have to change your password, all of a sudden all your automation is broken and you have to re-record it, which can be time consuming. So let's talk about how we can use a multi-hybrid cloud to help manage these RPA bots, because there's something really cool about multi-hybrid cloud architectures. They handle security across multiple domains for you really well, right? They handle inter-cloud communication in a secure way, so you don't have to establish that every time that you create a new bot. There's a lot of things that it can handle for you. So let's take a look and see how could we use an RPA bot in a multi-hybrid cloud and let that multi-hybrid cloud orchestration happen for us so it can establish the security for us as we pass in the security credentials at the top. It can handle where it's running effectively and establish a secure overlay network to connect everything together. So let's take a look on how we can manage that and see what benefits we get out of using multi-hybrid cloud technology to help in the management of RPA bots running in my ecosystem. So first, let's take a look at the area of a multi-hybrid cloud that are most important to the RPA bots, and it's the automation frameworks that are out there. Right? This is really where it ties in well. Well, there's two types of automation frameworks. If you include RPA tools as an automation framework, which it is because it's recording the way a user interacts with the user interface, and it automates that in a reusable way. So that's really good. There's also DevOps tools that do automation as well, right? Cool thing is they both give a lot of the same capabilities and abilities. Whether it's flexibility, RPA tools give some of that flexibility, repeatability, most definitely, deployment and provision. All those tools have some aspect of that, and ease of use, they've really focused on that a lot. DevOps tools have those same things. Tools like SaltStack, Ansible, Puppet, and Chef. Very well known, large communities around each one. They're all flexible. How can I utilize both of those tools together to get this work that I need done in an automated way? Whether I am using an RPA to tie legacy applications to modern applications, or I'm using it in its traditional sense of helping an information worker automate highly repetitive tasks that they're working on. It's good to understand how I can utilize both. So let's first take a look at a concept of building RPA bots. Today, a user will sit down, they'll fire up the tool, it basically records what they're doing on their screen. They will then save it. They could go back and make some changes and add variations to it by adding variables and arguments, passing in security credentials, and then they run it on their machine. So this is an information worker developing or creating an RPA bot. Well, now let's say I want to reuse that bot in several different places. I want to be able to version control that bot. What tools does that bot need in order to run? Because you're tying tools together, you need to make sure that you have an environment set up that have all those tools. So if I want to run this maybe in the background in an unattended way, I need to know what the versions of the tools were, all those things. So we came up with this idea of, what if I were to bundle the RPA bot with all of the tools that it uses, and including in there a runtime environment like in a VDI, a virtual desktop environment, so that I could easily repeat that recording of the RPA bot over and over again. And I could tear it down and start it up easily. So we came up with the idea of creating a bundle. And it is an RPA bot bundle. And this RPA bundle allows me to inject all of my tools inside that same bundle. So since it's bundled together, I can version it together. I can treat it as one entity that flows through my normal development pipeline that I've already established, from building that to testing it to running it in production across multiple different environments. And the cool thing about, if I do this concept of the bundle, I can get all of the benefits of using bundles that exist today, like injecting network and environment parameters into the bundle that can then be passed into the different tools and the bot itself. And it can establish a microsegmented network domain specifically for that bundle. So now it's secure as well. I can also inject in there secrets like passwords and usernames if I have multiple, or authentication keys, and I can inject those in at runtime as well into the bundle. This gives me the ability to use that bundle as different users if I need to, right? Which gives me additional reuse. Now, because it's a VDI environment, it's a virtual desktop that's interactive as well. So I can run this whole concept both in an unattended mode and an attended mode. So this bundle concept is really important. That gives me a really cool benefit, as you can see when we talk about dropping that bundle into your typical DevOps or SecDevOps pipelining, that software pipelining that you normally run. So like in that example, your dev environment now is run by your information worker that is developing this RPA bot. He develops it in this dev environment. He then pushes it into that bundle. He can push that definition of the bundle into like GitHub, and then we'll build that, run some tests on it, and then it puts it up into a pre-production registry or a staging area where I run additional tests on it. If it passes, I push it into a production registry, and now I can run it in production. So just like I would normally do with any other application software. Now, the other cool thing about this as well is if a dev team creates a new version of the application and it releases it, it's not going to mess up my bot, because my bot is versioned with the previous version of that application. What it means is I, as the information worker, would say, all right, I'm going to take that new application and I'm going to create a new version of the same bot. Release that out, and then now I have real version control over my bots. And I don't get surprises from an application changing out from underneath of me. Now, that's completely true if I can put all the applications in the bundle. Now, that's not always the case. You may have a legacy application, maybe it's running on a mainframe, that I have hooks into. You can still bundle a reference it's almost like a reference pointer in my bundle to that legacy application. But if that legacy application changes, then I'm not going to know about those changes until I'm in production and it's running. Unless every time that a legacy application on a mainframe or something that can't be bundled, but only by reference, changes, then I run it through a dev cycle as well, which I could easily do. So let's talk about some of the problems with bots. Because I'm recording user interface interaction, a lot of times what I found is some users actually say, I'm going to work around security and just run everything in privileged mode. Right? I'm going to run all my applications in privileged mode. Who cares about security? Well, your CISO may care a lot about security. So you got to be careful of that. The other thing you have to watch out for is that your user interfaces and your RPA bots are tightly coupled. In fact, they are completely coupled, right? Because your RPA bot is dependent on your user interface being a certain way, whether it's an RPA bot that goes by mouse XY position clicks or using tags inside a web page. You've got to understand that now you're tightly coupled across multiple applications, right? So any changes to user interface can be a major problem for these bots, right? Which means that they're very brittle and they can't handle change very well. And it can be very difficult if you don't design your bot correctly. It'll be very difficult to reuse it in other processes or workflows. I suggest going with smaller number of steps and creating like small mini bots that can be used with other bots. That's a better approach. Then you can increase the number of reuses of a specific bot. Maybe it only does one thing instead of doing a full workflow by itself, right? And then there are some user interfaces that are dynamic in nature, that are constantly changing based off of environment issues around them. RPAs have a harder time working in those. Now, AI is supposed to come and save and help with the RPAs, and all the RPA vendors are looking at how they can leverage AI to help so that they're not tied so directly to a user interface, but that they can infer what things are on a user interface as they change, right? Since not all processes are easy to automate via user interface because of dynamic user interfaces or security or authentication challenges, they're trying to see how they can use AI to help in some of those cases. So right now, it's still at the very beginning of this, but I think that's where most of that investment money is headed. That's out there. I don't know because I'm not in those companies, but it's probably a wild guess, probably a pretty good guess that they're trying to use Inference to help when they are managing processes or creating new bots, so they're less prescriptive. It can be a little bit more fuzzy, but they can still get things done. Another area that I think that they're looking at is that you have self-learning bots that can optimize processes by looking at user interfaces and looking how workers are using a user interface in very many different ways, and then giving a better guidance to the information workers on ways to optimize the way that they're working, and then eventually optimize those RPA bots. So very interesting space, a lot of research going on in this space, and I imagine there'll be a lot of spin outs of new technology coming out of this work that's being done. Now let's talk about bots in general. I do not think it is a great idea to have a bot that you think is going to last for years. There's just too much change in the system. So make sure that you have a plan to end of life an RPA bot when you develop it. And really the ideal plan is to come up with integration points that aren't using a user interface, that are using common APIs that you would have. If you don't have a common API with a legacy application, it might be time to build one. So use your bot as a stopgap to help get over long integration development cycles and get something working right away, but have a plan on how you are going to remove that bot in the future. It could be that you get rid of a legacy application completely, right? Or you're going to replace the legacy application with a new application, or maybe you get rid of that whole workflow completely. Don't see your RPA bots as the end. It is a stopgap measure. The reason I say that is because they are fragile and brittle, because they are so dependent on user interface changes and layouts. So here's some tips that we talked about. Just real quick, treat RPAs as complex services that are running in your multi-hybrid cloud. Put them through your SecDevOps or your DevSecOps workflows, just like you would any other application. Make sure you're controlling and doing configuration management on them, version control and things like that. Inject security and authorization at runtime through your RPA tools or through your bots themselves. Look at RPA tools, make sure that you can automate that step. If you can't, then you've just traded automation with another manual process. Not a good idea, right? And then find ways to reuse your RPA bots in different parts of your organization. If you break it down into a common workflow that you see over and over again, instead of just looking at a big, massive workflow, you'll have that opportunity to do that by having smaller bots that work together. And then also make sure you have a plan to replace your RPA bot with a simplified integration. This will run faster, lower cost, and less mistakes. And then also look for ways to decrease legacy applications, either replace or remove them in the future.